in the world, I was going to go with him. So Dumarkesh and I, so almost same sort of thing. We were like hiding under the bed, under the pillows, under the mattresses, all our, copies of the newspaper and the ad and all of our materials that went into composing that, copies of the Free the Soviet Hare Krishnas report.
But you really felt that in India that you were in jeopardy?
Oh, absolutely.
Why?
Because Soviet-Indian relations were very, very important. And there was a real closeness. And if, well, it's like now. I mean, this whole thing that's going on in Russia with the piece of land in Moscow. I mean, who are the devotees appealing to? They're appealing to the Indians to put pressure on the Russians. And the Indians, in some quarters, are putting pressure. And, I mean, so, because it's a long-standing, very close relationship. And when America was siding with Pakistan, the Soviet Union was siding with India. So here's the arch rivals, Pakistan and India, and here's the arch rivals, America and the Soviet Union, and one goes with Pakistan and one goes with India. So it's a real loyalty and a, long-standing relationship. So, I mean, they didn't want to see Hare Krishnas or anything get in the way of that.
Why don't you explain about the devotees coming to India after in 1989? That's kind of fun, I guess.
One thing is, if he's standing up, still relate to him as if he's sitting.
Okay. I had an idea that we should take, that we had gotten, not sure if we had gotten registered, when we were registered in the Soviet Union as I guess it was before 91, we were still not allowed to go into the country. I had an idea that we should take a group of devotees from the Soviet Union to India on pilgrimage. So that was 1989. So I got in touch with Krishna Kumar, who was the main man in Moscow, and thus, because it was still the Soviet Union and Moscow was the center of the Soviet government, so I told him, make up a list of 25 devotees who should be kind of the first ones on the list to be able to go to India. And let's see if we can get permission for 25 devotees to go. And it blew his mind. He couldn't, believe or conceive of such a experience. So I said, and make a second list, that if any of those 25 couldn't go, we can draw from the second list and get a total of 25. So he made up these 225 name lists, and then it actually became two lists that totaled 59 devotees. So then here we were on the phone trying to determine who of these 59 devotees should go and who should not go. And we found it virtually impossible to scratch anybody from either of these lists. Because when you start to talk, this one went through this one went through that, this one endured this one endured that. So we ended up with a list of 59 devotees. And I said, so submit the whole list. We don't want all 59 to go. He submitted that list, and, in basically what the foreign ministry's response was, you guys are nuts. That there are millions of Muslims in the Soviet Union, and for the annual Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, only 25 go. And you don't have millions of Hare Krishna devotees in the Soviet Union, and you want 59 to go? And our response was yes. They said, scratch them. We said, we're not scratching any. We want all 59 to go. And so many things. There was so much negotiation back and forth. At one point, I told the devotees to chain themselves to the gate of the foreign ministry, because they said, no, you're not going. No, we're not giving exit visas for you to go. And I said, well, then chain yourselves to the gate of the Soviet ministry. And they did that. A group, I think it was 10 or 12 devotees, did that. And we just kept up the pressure, and we want all 59. And some of these devotees who were on this list were still in prison. So in the case of Amalabhakta, and I forget the other devotee's name, another man, they were in prison. 2 weeks later, they were on a plane going to India. And they skimped and scraped and got whatever money they could together. And they flew from Moscow to Calcutta. And when they arrived and the door to that plane, that Aeroflot plane opened, they started marching off the plane in dhotis and saris. Madhava Ghosh from Tashkent in Uzbekistan is an excellent artist. He had painted pictures like this on hard, stiff board of Krishna and Lord Chaitanya, and Mahavishnu, and the devotees walked off the plane with 5 or 6 of these posters, and we had a kirtan, a whole group of devotees from Calcutta and Mayapur to receive them, and it was an unbelievable experience seeing these devotees setting down in India. And we had press conferences in Calcutta. We had Adri Dharan Prabhu, president in Calcutta, had arranged an all-expense-paid trip to Jagannath Puri for the devotees. So we had a little entourage, Ayojapati, Indradumna, my family, and some other, Krishnadas Kaviraj, some other devotees who accompanied the devotees to Puri. We stopped in Raimuna along the way and had a huge feast of Kirchor Gopinath's Kir. Went out to Puri for an unbelievable vacation, spiritual vacation in Puri, eating Jagannath Prasad twice a day. We had our own cooks. We had purchased big pots to cook in. And then from there we went on to Delhi and then Vrindavan. And the devotees stayed for over a month. They took back, we got donations from everybody. We bought something like 30 harmoniums, 50 mridungas, 200 pair of kartals. I think it was 57 pair of deities that Radhapad Prabhu paid for. We had been ordering in advance and buying from the market deities for all the centers and throughout the Soviet Union where devotees were living, excuse me, and preaching. So when they went back, they went in 2 shifts, flying back to Moscow. They took back a total of 4.5 tons of luggage, all devotional paraphernalia, and it was an amazing experience. And when the second group left, as they all went through customs, went through immigration, my wife and kids and I were there, and Krishnadas Kaviraj sending them off, and we went to the little snack bar after they went through immigration, and I sat down at the table, and I felt like I was never going to get up from that table. I felt like I had not a drop of energy left in me. At that point, I was in the GBC for the former Soviet Union. I was the chairman of the Mayapur Vrindavan Festival, and I had all those duties and responsibilities, and I had 59 Soviet devotees there to take care of and make all arrangements for. And at the end of that, I felt like it was at the end of Bhagavad Gita when Krishna's chariot, they stepped off and it went up in flames, turned to ash. I kind of felt that my job was done, my service was done, and things changed, and it became, almost like, it'll never be just another country. It'll never be just another, yatra of devotees. I mean, it's always going to be special. It's always going to be unique. It's always going to be a struggle. And I was of the opinion always, and we talked about it, that when we beat the KGB, our problems are just going to begin. And they were, we beat them. I mean, we prevailed through Krishna and Prabhupada's grace, through hard work, through the help of Mr. Gorbachev and his assistance. I mean, it was all the right timing. The devotees around the world helped tremendously in our campaign of the Committee to Free Soviet Hare Krishnas. But lots of other problems have have continued and will continue. I think it's always going to be a struggle there, but I felt that, kind of my real service and my real work was done, and it was time for others. There were devotees in over 60 cities around the country. It was certainly more than I could handle as the GBC. So much attention was needed. So more and more devotees came, more GBC men came, more initiating gurus came, and it was time to turn it over.
I don't understand one thing. How was it that the devotees were still being persecuted because you said they were in jail, and yet you were able to get people to give visas to all these devotees to go to India? I just don't get it.
I don't get it either, but somehow or other it all happened. Like I say, 2 weeks before, Amala Bhakta was in prison, and 2 weeks after that he was in India. He got out of prison. 2 weeks later, he was on a flight arriving in Calcutta.
And after that, they were never persecuted as. And what
about not as a, not as the religion, not as a whole, not as a systematic. But still, there's persecution going on today. Discrimination and persecution and troubles.
Well, I don't quite get when the whole registration of Hare Krishnas, how that came.
Registration came about, I think, in either 89 or 90, and we were the first religion to be registered as a bona fide religion in the Soviet Union since World War II. And one thing that in 1991, at the time of the fall of the breakup of the Soviet Union, my wife and I had gone to St. Petersburg from Sweden to go to Rath Yatra in St. Petersburg, which was, I think, still Leningrad. So we went to Rath Yatra. We took an overnight train to Moscow. When we arrived in Moscow, we were met at the train station by devotees, and they said, "Have you heard the news?" And I said, "No." I said, "Even if we heard the news, we wouldn't have understood. It would have been in Russian." They said, "Gorbachev's been kicked out and the country's under military control." And my wife and I looked at each other, and our kids were in Sweden. We thought, "Oh my God, are we ever going to get out of here? Are we ever going to see our kids again?" So we went to the temple and went to our respective rooms, and then we met in my room. And Niranjan Maharaj was in Moscow at the time. And we all got together, and he brought in his portable radio, and we turned on the BBC, and we're listening that, yes, indeed, Gorbachev, there was a coup against Gorbachev, and the Soviet Union was under military control, the borders were sealed, and there were unconfirmed reports of tanks in the streets of Moscow. So Niranjan Maharaj, Hari Puja, and I looked at each other, and we said, "Well, let's go confirm the reports." So we took a taxi down toward Red Square, the center of Soviet government, at the Kremlin, and there was almost no traffic in the streets of Moscow. And we came, and we were still like a kilometer or two from Red Square, and the policeman said, "No, you can't go any further." We said, "Well, we have to go to our hotel, the National Hotel, which is the hotel that Prabhupada stayed in when he was in Moscow." It wasn't our hotel, but we told him so. And that's right next to Red Square. So he said, "Okay, go ahead." Came to another policeman a couple hundred yards ahead. And he said, "You can't go any further." We said, "We have to go to a hotel, the National Hotel." He says, "Okay, go ahead." Next one, the same thing. So we went through like 4 police checkpoints like that. And we ended up a couple blocks from the National Hotel, 4 or 5 blocks from the Kremlin. So the street was closed. So here we were. This is Gorky Street, Main Street, probably 4 lanes of traffic going each direction, heads right into Red Square. So we're walking down the middle of the street, and everybody else was, and everybody was getting a kick out of the fact that the street was closed. And so then all of a sudden, there's a little Jeep, a Soviet Army Jeep driving by, and a man making an announcement, something, machine, over the loudspeaker. So I said, machine means car, machine means truck. I realized machine also means tank. So there was this Soviet Jeep, then a big forklift, a huge forklift, and a line of 12 tanks barreling down the middle of Gorky Street. Like kind of not tearing up the asphalt, but making dust and stuff on the asphalt road. And Hari Puja and Niranjan Maharaj and Krishna Kumar ran to the sidewalk, and I was like halfway out in the middle of the street, sort of dumbfounded by these tanks rolling into the center of Moscow. And I was probably 15 feet away from them, and they're just coming one after another and after another, and I'm just counting them, 12 of them. And they went, and they turned a corner, and I didn't know where they went. We were, at that point, right near the Central Post and Telegraph Office, which is, along with the television station and the radio station, the first place that, coup people take over to control the media and what goes out. So we were right there. So we were very near it. So we walked up to it, and we looked across the street, and there was a little small side street, and there were tanks parked there. So we walked over, and sure enough, there were, I think, 9 Soviet tanks parked in that side street, right across the street from the Central Post and Telegraph Office. And there were all of these young kids peering up, or, like their torso and their head above out of the tank. And they were filthy dirty, and they looked so scared, and they were probably 17, 18 years old. And there was all these Soviet citizens yelling at them, old ladies beating the tank with umbrellas. And people were afraid, but they were really angry. And so we stayed there for a little while. And then we heard that, we heard something about the Russian White House, the Parliament building, that I think that Yeltsin was going to be giving a speech there because they had captured the coup members trying to leave Moscow. They captured them at the airport, and Yeltsin was going to be giving a speech, and Gorbachev was locked up out in the country somewhere in his dacha, his country home. So we were walking not very far to the Russian White House, and we come on this side street, and there was another row of tanks. So we were discussing, we said, these guys definitely they're armed, they have ammunition, they're ready to shoot if they have to. And Krishna Kumar, the Russian devotee who was in charge of everything in Moscow, he said, no, they don't have ammunition. They would never shoot the Soviet people. And we said to him, because here we were the Americans, Niranjan Maharaj, Hari Puja, and myself, we said, of course. You think they're going to come out in the streets with tanks and confronting all these people and have no ammunition? So he said, no, they don't have. I said, go ask them. So he and I walked up to one of the tanks, and the young boy was out the top of it. And he said, you don't have ammunition, do you? And the young kid said back to him, he said, do you think we're crazy? You think we'd be out here in this situation and not have ammunition? And Krishna Kumar turned, and he was as white as a ghost. He couldn't believe it, that the Soviet government had, the army to turn on its own people if it had to. So we then went down we made our way to the White House, and shortly after getting there, out comes this motorcade, and there was Yeltsin in the second car waving at the people on his way to the airport to arrest and take possession of these people who had made the coup against Gorbachev. And that was the beginning of the fall of the Soviet Union. They took down the Soviet flag over the Kremlin and put up the Russian flag. And it was a pretty exciting time and a pretty historical time to be there. And it was kind of like the culmination of a lot of hard work that so many of us worked together on and put together to, and I think it definitely made its contribution toward changing the face of the country, maybe even changing the course of history in the world.
Hari, so you basically tried to influence things and affect things from the border, but from the outside, from the borders.
Yeah, everything I did was from outside.
And were there any times when you were, sitting in Sweden where people would come from the Soviet Union, they would come to, they would get out for whatever business reason and come see you, and then, you would give them some kind of instruction or?
I don't think so. The only one ever came out was Veda Vyasa with that whole thing with marrying Mitravinda, and it was the whole thing.
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, that was a very big event, but more or less it was a big event that didn't really lead anywhere, but it was a very big event when it happened to get him out. A lot of publicity. It was a very fun thing.
Can you tell that story?
What was his thing, so he can tell you? It was a hunger strike outside the Swedish.
That's right. I remember.
It was something that gave us hope that we could really have something happen. There was a devotee, Veda Vyas. He was a journalist in Moscow, and he was put in a psychiatric hospital. And he was fairly active as a devotee in Moscow, but we got word that he was... No, excuse me, let me back up. He was an excellent English speaker, and we wanted to get him out to Sweden to work on translation work. So we arranged to send a single lady to Russia, to Moscow, to make a paper marriage, to have an official marriage, in order to get him out of the country. And so she went a couple of times, and I think unrelated to that, perhaps related, perhaps the fact that she was going, and they knew inevitably what was going to happen. They were going to get married. He was going to try to immigrate. But we don't know all that. But what we do know is they put him in a psychiatric hospital. So we devised a plan where she would get dressed in a wedding dress, have a big sign on a bed sheet, appealing to Mr. Gorbachev. She would pitch a tent outside, across the street from the Soviet embassy in Stockholm, which happened to be on the front lawn of the biggest Swedish newspaper in the country. And she did a hunger strike. She announced the hunger strike. We had a press conference. She announced the hunger strike. And she was out there probably for about a week, if I recall correctly. And all of a sudden, I was communicating back and forth with another devotee in Moscow. And I don't remember how we got the news, but we got the news, and maybe even they walked across the street from the Soviet embassy. I don't remember exactly, but we got the news that he's been released from the psychiatric hospital, and he will be on a plane tomorrow to Sweden. And they did. They released him. They put him on a plane. He arrived, no passport, no documents whatsoever. Met him at the airport. It was a huge story, especially in Stockholm, but in Sweden. And it really gave us hope that we could pressure the Soviet devotees and get something of what we wanted. Here was a man locked up, and they not only let him out, but they, what do you call it? I was going to say exported him, exiled him, sent him out of the country. So it was really a very promising accomplishment, and really gave fuel to our Committee to Free Soviet Hare Krishnas.
Was this before the Hare Krishnas became an official religion?
Oh yes, oh absolutely, absolutely. This was the beginning days. 85?
Yeah.
It was the beginning days of the Committee to Free Soviet Hare Krishnas.
Now, were you part of that committee?
Who?
You.
Part?
Or were you, I mean, how did that, I don't know. I mean, who formed that committee? Who formulated the idea for that committee? Who funded that committee?
He formulated the idea. He was the main strategist. I just supported whatever he did.
It was funny, I can't remember where we were. I can remember kind of the room where we were.
I remember what happened. It was somebody was
we got a phone
chastising us for not doing enough. And it was from some Russian dissident some Russian dissident was on our case for not doing enough for our people. I
Oh,
remember,
it was Vladimir Bukovsky.
and we were in my room in Almvik.
No, it was somewhere else. We were somewhere, and I remember it was like it was a ground floor room. And I remember I was pacing back and forth and telling you that because it was prompted by, I think Hari Puja called and said she just got a call from somebody in Moscow saying more devotees had been arrested. And I told you about a conversation I had with Vladimir Bukovsky, very, very famous Soviet dissident, and he was saying, you've got to do more. You've got to help your people there. And we were there pondering, trying to figure out what to do. And then somehow or other, through him and through some other contacts, you know, he said, you got to make them famous. You've got to do, you know, you've got to work on their behalf. So we had postcards printed with...
I don't remember where that was, but you're right. Yeah, you're right. That's how that
somewhere. And I don't remember. We were really pondering what to do. And we said, all right, we got to do it. And that decision was when we made that decision. That was when the whole thing started. And we had postcards printed with the devotee's picture on it. We had pictures smuggled out. We had postcards printed. We sent them to Gorbachev. We sent them to the procurator, the chief prosecutor. We sent them to, if they were in a psychiatric hospital, to labor camp, if they were in a labor camp. We flooded, again, from all over the world. We sent packages out to America, to England, to France, to Switzerland, and these things were all flooded into all these places from all over the world.
I couldn't stand the name. The acronym that came out of it, what was it?
CFSHK.
I could never tolerate that. I hated it. Because can't we get a better name? It's so big. It's such a lousy, way you squish the letters together. Can't it spell something?
But it said it, Committee to Free Soviet Hare Krishnas. We had T-shirts, we had buttons, we had bumper stickers. I mean, and it was in India. It was all over the place, and devotees helped so much, and it worked. It worked.
I basically just gave him all the money I had. Whatever I had, I gave him. That was basically how it worked. I used to have these Vyas Pujas, and we used to collect all the money, and I used to hand it to him. Nobody knew that was going on. He used to come in my room. My Vyas Puja would be in Alvik.
It would finish at 3. At 10 after 3, I'd be in his room.
We'd count all the money. He'd walk in. He'd take it all the way. It was hysterical. Later on...
Just like this. Just keep it going. Keep it going.
We were just working the audience. Please warn them. So funny. It was so funny. And then people later on would accuse me of, what'd you do with all that money? What'd you do with all that money? Like, give me a break.
What'd you do with all that money? I gave it to Kirtiraj.
Give me a break, will you? Oh, so funny.
But everybody, I mean, all the devotees helped. I mean, Chitahari, we had a meeting in France. All of Harikesha's regional secretaries, all Bhagwan's regional secretaries, we had a meeting in Paris. And I think it was at Ermenonville. And Chitahari came for some reason, and Pratapana from Australia.
Australia did great. I mean, I love that thing with the doves and the song that Prahlad made, and that was fabulous. Even though they really didn't do, so much as far as big event, but that thing they did had such power.
All over the world, the effect of it. All over
the whole world. But when I heard that song and I saw that video, I said, my God, this is really happening with these, these birds flying out of the box.
And all these young kids singing this unbelievable song.
Our hairs were standing on end when we saw it.
Some of us were crying.
It was so fabulous. We never could believe that all over the world people would even care. Because so far it's all been secret, right? And then all of a sudden, this
was Chitahari hearing the story and getting so inspired and wanting to do something. He went back to Australia and he organized this. And it was phenomenal.
Beautiful. It was just like a one thing, but it had such power.
And I think Bob Hawke was the Australian Prime Minister at the time. Yeah. And he spoke to Gorbachev. It was like shortly afterwards, they made a presentation to him, and shortly afterwards he had a meeting with Gorbachev, and he presented our case.
It really had an effect. That particular thing really had an effect somehow worldwide. It was such a good song that people all over the world took notice, that who ordinarily would not have taken notice, that the power of that music was just really Prahlad, right?
Yep.
Really good. I loved it.
And Gaura Gopal was the one who coordinated all that. Chitahari went back and got him going, and Gaura Gopal coordinated that, the song, the recording, the video, and he put so much into it as well.
It was really great.
Is there any person?
If you think about it, basically there's basically, honestly, when it comes down to the core of it, there was two guys sitting in a room, scratching their head, trying to figure out what to do. I mean, he did most of it. I'm not trying to say it, but basically at the core there was this, and we never really believed it would be more people involved. It was like it just like transformed the whole thing from this local attempt to a global attempt. And I think when it did that, it shifted the energy of the world in such a way that Gorbachev picked up on it. Because while it was still a local attempt, it was still local. It didn't really have the same pizzazz. It didn't have the same impact. It just somehow, it was just us against them, and we were small and they were big. But when that happened, somehow it shifted. I can't explain it better than that. It just shifted. And then all of a sudden, it's like when you're losing the battle, like in Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf comes in at the end with his forces and everybody gets inspired. They were losing and all of a sudden they get inspired. That's kind of how I felt anyway. That's how it affected me, that, like, oh boy, this is such an effort, and oh my God, not much is happening, and oh my God, this costs so much money. I used to think like that about money, how to get it, how to make more, how to use it. And I was running out of music inspiration. Making these records was getting a real drag for me. So then this all of a sudden happened, and it was like Gandalf in the White Horse. And I just said, yeah, we can do it. It was, for me personally, it was an important event. He was already so fired up all the time. But for me, it was important.
Well, you had all these disciples there. There was no, until other of our godbrothers went. So, was there times, or can you recall times where you thought of certain people that were languishing, or like you mentioned, Premavati, of course, that that would really keep you up at night? I mean, that would really come into your realm of consciousness, and you would be meditating on their situations.
Well, I'm a very, of course, this is not very ISKCON-y what I'm going to say now, but I'll tell you the truth. I'm kind of a very esoteric person, and we were having communications on a psychic level. And I mean, later on, when we finally actually physically met again, they confirmed the same things that I was saying to him on our side. They were confirming on their side, which blew his mind because he's not really a kind of psychic guy. So we were like having these kind of connections that was holding it together. It was kind of more of a energetic support, because honestly speaking, I'm not a very strong person. When such horrible things are happening, I tend to just collapse. I just get like, I don't have the power. He has this guy here is like really strong. He has like enormous power. I don't really have that. I can do things for some time, but at one point it just becomes so overwhelming for me. I just kind of collapse and fall to pieces. I can't really go on with that capacity. He's the one who really made it happen. I mean, no matter what he says, it really was his thing. And I was with great pleasure supporting him. I mean, for me to make the money, to arrange the money, of course there was constant communication going on. I was constantly writing letters. Every time there was initiation, it was like channel all these beads, send out all these letters, constantly answering, writing letters. There were a lot of phone calls. There was definitely communication on the regular level. But I saw my main role as just trying to support everybody with my energy, with my love, with my concern. I couldn't really do more than that. And I figured the only way I could practically manifest this, because you have to remember that in the middle of this, I was physically collapsed. I had, it was everything too much for me. I couldn't go on. From September of '87, basically, until 1990, I didn't do anything. I didn't even answer the phone. So I was basically, I saw my whole job was to support him, and I did that with pleasure, and I didn't, I never really minded being in the background. It's not like I didn't do anything, but I wasn't publicly manifesting it.
And I'll say that just as he said with his love and his support and his, communications from the other side as well, I think their love, their dedication, their devotion, their commitment to their spiritual master, I think maintained them and gave them strength, gave them determination, gave them the will against all odds to keep going, and not just to tread water, but to expand and grow and print books and more books and take risks, take chances. I think I said off camera that this guy who was sitting next to me, the interpreter for Gorbachev, I found out afterwards when I told the devotees in Moscow about this story that Gorbachev has Bhagavad Gita too and how he got it. They said, oh yeah, him. His brother helps the devotees, used to help the devotees transport these underground printed Bhagavad Gitas. His Samizdat publication of Bhagavad Gitas. So, I mean, they weren't just treading water. I mean, they were growing, they were expanding, they were doing things that were, even the networks and the organizations of, people doing this stuff who had been doing it for dozens of years were flabbergasted at what they were able to accomplish. And that was because they were into Prabhupada's books, they were studying Prabhupada's books, and because they had such conviction, such dedication, such devotion, such love.
And also I was very careful about what I asked them to do. I would say rather conservative in the sense that I didn't want them to get in more trouble, so I was trying to help them do it in such a way they wouldn't get in more trouble yet could expand at the same time. But I did tell them that their main business, not to get caught while doing it, was to just somehow print more books. And there were like many different kinds of groups. If you want to talk about personalities, there was this groups of personalities who were very intimately connected with me, who were involved in the translation and the production and distribution of books. They were like the ones who were taking very extraordinary risks with materials. It's one thing to go out and tell somebody something. I mean, that's kind of like an event that, unless it's recorded on video or something, may or may not get you in trouble. But they were dealing with physical items like printed books with paper and
stealing paper and stuff from printing houses.
And they were dealing with printers, real printers. This was not amateur. This was done with real printers and real paper procurers and real typesetting machines. And at that time, that was all lead setting. So it was very difficult for them. And I found that I could offer all my experience and expertise in these fields of book production in a very positive way with them, and also somehow or another get them to understand the seriousness of what they were doing and the consequences of what they were doing by explaining things to them in such a way that they didn't get caught doing it.
We had a kind of a balance going on.
Yeah,
because he was real cautioning to them, and I just kept like pushing them, hammering them to push the envelope, to get as much as you could. And I was really worried. It was a big anxiety and a big responsibility I felt, because I didn't want to see him get locked up. I didn't want to see him get shot up with haloperidol and all these psychotropic drugs and, these things happening. But at the same time, somebody said, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And I just really felt that we had to put different kinds, internally and externally, we had to put pressure. And he was very cautioning and very caring for them individually.
But to be fair, you did not push them to do things that they were not encouraging you to push them to do.
Correct.
In that sense, it wasn't like you were doing something fanatical. You were just responding to what they were capable of doing and what they desired to do. Mm-hmm. And what I was doing was basically trying to balance that with the practical manner in which you can do that without getting caught or without screwing up everything. So it wasn't really that you were, you did it quite well. It was quite an interesting team in that regard. I mean, there were other groups of people who enjoyed, like Mahmud Thakur enjoyed being the leader of his group, of actually, they had this spirit of enjoying to be in charge of their spearhead into what they saw as the materialistic existence in the Soviet Union. So it's amazing that there's so many of these very powerful people took up their roles and spearheaded this enormous effort. And that's why I wanted to talk about personalities. I mean, okay, here's something we can talk about, because you don't have to use it in the film or not. It's not that everything we say has to be used, but everything changed when ISKCON entered into Russia. When it became part of ISKCON, and all ISKCON peoples came in, and ISKCON kind of leaders came in, and everything changed. The way it was became now an organization. It became hierarchical. It had leaders. It had authorities, people who told you what to do, people who said what you couldn't do. There were buildings, and in these buildings they had facilities. For example, they could offer them food, they could offer them clothes. A lot of poorer people took advantage of that, like in India also. Now, if you want to contrast historically what it was like in those beginning years, basically up until the point it became organized, and what happened after it became organized. And I don't know if he wanted to say it, but I think his feeling that our work was done, my feeling our work was done, had a certain parallel to that entrance of organization and hierarchy and ISKCON into it, more than we'd like to admit perhaps in public. But factually speaking, you had a totally different mentality of person in this set as you did in that set. And that's why it becomes so difficult for people to actually understand the transformation and the pressures that transformed what took place in that period of transition, which I think in any historical document is very important from a historical, sociological, or psychological point of view. These points really should be brought up. And what I'm really trying to say is the personalities before, we encouraged their leadership. We encouraged their independence. We encouraged their independent thinking. We encouraged them to not have to depend on us to get instruction. I mean,
because we understood that was necessary. We understood the situation, we understood them, and we understood what was necessary for them to survive and thrive.
And also it's the way, well, that's the way I am as a person also. I like to just give people some facility and let them do their thing. So at that time there were these enormously powerful people. You had Vrindavan Das, who was this incredibly powerful person. He had this determination to lead others. You have Premavati, who's this extraordinarily powerful woman. I mean, basically you don't find women so powerful. You have Mahmud Thakur going out and preaching everywhere. You've got Bhardraj doing the same thing. You've got, of course, Sannyas and Kamalamala. And Sannyas was basically handling all the book publication thing. Kamalamala was doing all of this gathering and making things happening with people. Yamaraj, these people, they worked together like a very great unit. They were enjoying the challenge of producing these totally illegal books and doing it in such a marvelous way. At great personal risk, yet they didn't really care anymore. They just were feeling so alive as people. They were feeling more alive than they ever felt before. And you've got many of them, even if I don't mention their names, it doesn't mean that they're not important. There were many, many people who were very independently powerful, very independently motivated, which is the most important thing in any endeavor. They were very motivated to do things, even though they had no contact with others. And we were basically supporting their motivations and keeping them motivated by sharing the results that were taking place and showing how things were happening. But when they went to jail and everything, for me, I lost my motivation. I said that if what I'm doing is causing these people to go to jail or go to mental hospitals, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And that's where we started having some kind of conflict, in the sense that I became even more insanely conservative in my... I was afraid for these people. I just couldn't handle the responsibility of being the one who who encouraged in some sense or who instigated this situation. So I couldn't handle that. And so I kind of like withdrew to a certain extent, but I still was supporting him totally because, I had to do that. I wanted to do that. But then when the whole situation transformed and I felt more relieved that they were out, they hadn't gone through great trouble. Okay, we lost 2 devotees. One was a baby. There was another one had trouble too besides Sachisuta. People like Sarvabhaumana lost his vision in an eye and had great troubles, and his ear was bashed. And there was so many stories of it's so heart-rendering, the devastation, the physical devastation. But they never lost their spirit. They never lost their. It was as if their lives were finding meaning in their suffering. That their struggle against what they saw as a very formidable opponent who was doing the wrong thing for people was worth it. They had a cause to live for, and yet when that was over, and it really happened from one day to the next. The most amazing thing about this is that it happened basically from one day to the next. That there was this enormous pressure, and then within a very short period of time, maybe a month, all of a sudden people were knocking down the Berlin Wall. There was everybody was exulting in this complete transformation. And at that time, all the ISKCON personalities started coming, which I had said, I don't know if this is the best thing. It's not like I want to restrict anybody, but I'm not sure if you want to overlay a hierarchical organization on this basically anarchistic association of very powerful people. But because of time, and I wasn't really involved anymore, I couldn't be involved in this, I didn't feel to be involved in this. It did happen like that. And then what started happening was a lot of conflict, which is normal in Russia, because Russia is based on conflict. That when you have 4 Russians, you'll have 2 parties, or 3 parties, maybe even 4 parties. And you'll have this conflict. You'll have this argumentative nature where everybody believes totally what they say. Everybody's completely into righteous indignation. They're into justice. They're into, these kind of qualities, which are normally good, but it also destroys their capacity to cooperate as people. And especially when you speak Russia, it's not really Russia. You're talking about Armenians, Azerbaijanians, Kazakhstanians, or Siberians, or Mongolians, or Ukrainians, or Lithuanians, or you got Northern Russians, and you got Georgians, and you've got Southern, and you got all this mixture of people who are not one autonomous people, who all think differently, feel differently, work differently, and you've got all of these conflicts going on in the place. So the individuality of the leadership, the independent, motivated personality to do things was suffocated to a certain extent. It was extinguished to a certain extent. And those personalities felt lousy about it. They felt uncomfortable about it. They didn't relate. They didn't fit in anymore. And yet they were the most competent persons, so they took up leadership positions and roles, but they were never very happy with that. They were never happy with what was going on. And this led to conflicts between ISKCON GBC members and authorities, and guruships, and competitions entered into it, and it was a little bit discouraging to me. I really never didn't want to get involved in it anymore. But I ended up getting involved with it when he left, and I was dragged into it by my feet, really, honestly, as a no choice kind of thing. So it was, it really, I suppose in any historical movement, you look at the American Revolution, it was such a powerful force, and then everybody was so ecstatic afterwards, but then they realized they had never really solved the problem with the money, and then the War of 1812 took place over about the bank and the money, the central banking and the money and the basis of the currency. It wasn't until that was over that things settled down. I'm not saying whether better or for worse, but they settled down. So I think you have these stages.
Until the Civil War.
Yeah, you have these stages whereby there are these historical trends going on, and I think this, when I left, which is definitely part of the history too, that kind of a person who I was talking about in the beginning kind of felt that, yes, this is the right spirit. But I was not ready to, again, take up such a role. So I just backed off of that and just let them, again, independently do what they want to do. So you have this like transformation, but you still have these incredible people there who are doing incredible things in whatever they do with spreading spirituality. We have these still beautiful temples with nice deities. You have really enormous power there still going on, but I think it is transformed into a way which is more according to the individuals. Because even though now everything's hierarchical still within ISKCON, still it is these places where you have these empowered personalities doing wonderful things.
It's interesting that Krishna has removed the obstacle to that individuality of the permanent temple, building, edifice, and place of congregation, which in turn encourages the very thing that began in the first place, which was the individual initiative and the more anarchistic approach to Krishna consciousness.
I'm sorry I used the word anarchistic. It's the wrong word. But what you're saying is
individualistic.
Individualistic, the capacity of a human being to represent his feelings, his convictions in a way which is compatible and attractive and useful to other human beings.
And to be himself or herself.
Right. Now, if you look at Kirtiraj, if you want to talk about personalities, I would like to talk about Kirtiraj because he's a really wonderful example of this. Now, here's somebody who, even right now, his heart is burning to do something similar, like, say, in Cuba or wherever he wants to go.
We're trying to send him to Iraq, but
no.
But actually, you got to understand that this thing didn't happen because somebody said it had to happen. It didn't happen because Prabhupada said it should happen because he wasn't there to say it. It didn't happen because of just accident. It was a human being said, I will do this. And then it happened. And his faith and his devotion and his care about these people made it happen. So it's like history gets lost, Now somebody glorifies a Swami. I don't mean to in any way criticize Swamis. That's fine. They can come and give their lecture and do their kirtan and the whole thing, and people may glorify them. But they don't really understand that a Swami, let's say, who's been working in his place where he's been for a long time and doing his thing, that's fine. But there are individuals like Kirtiraj, especially Kirtiraj, of all individuals, who risked their lives. And I'm not just saying that in a very platonic kind of way. I mean, actually risked their lives to do something which was extraordinary. And that's why I pushed him into being a GBC. That's why I pushed him into these positions, because I felt he should be recognized for it. But he doesn't like to do that kind of thing. He just likes to help people. He likes to go to the ships and give books to the sailors. He likes to go to Cuba and just meet a couple of people and give them books, or anywhere where there's people he feels are suffering and need help. So I feel that the spirit of Lord Chaitanya's movement, or the spirit of really Gaudiya Vaishnavism, is not in an organization. It is in an individual who takes an endeavor, who looks in the mirror and says, I shall do this, and who makes a pact with God that, look, you help me do this, and I'm going to do this for you. And that's really where the power in any spiritual organization is. It's not in the organization itself. It's not in hierarchy. It's not even in the money. I'm sure if I didn't even give him the money, he would have figured it out in some other way. So it doesn't really, not a big deal for me. But it's that power. It's that conviction. I shall do this. And there are others like that. There's still others like that, who don't try to hide behind some barrier of a name or a position or an expectation, but who just take the world into their own hands, their actions into their own hands, the situations, the circumstances, and just make it something good.